It all began with a scream of twisted metal slicing through silence. A luxury SUV lay crumpled in the shadow of a snow-covered embankment, headlights flickering like dying embers. Wind howled through shattered glass, biting deep and mercilessly cold. Inside, the woman stirred, consciousness clawing its way through a fog of pain. Alone, injured, and stranded in a frozen wasteland, her past and power meant nothing here. Miles away, a mechanic closed his weary eyes, unaware that fate was hurtling toward him through the snowstorm, unstoppable and relentless. This was a place where status crumbled and survival mattered more than wealth, where a single act of kindness could rewrite destinies. But first, they'd have to face the storm, the bitter, unforgiving storm that would strip them bare, reveal their truths, and ignite a fire neither could have imagined. Tonight, their lives would intersect in ice and darkness, and nothing would ever be the same. The wind howled across the rugged Colorado highlands, rattling the aging windows of Cole's auto service with a persistent whistle that seeped into every crack in the old structure. Inside, under the faded glow of a single overhead bulb, Matthew Cole, lean, weathered, in his early 50s, wiped his oil-stained hands on a threadbare rag. His breath hung in the icy air, testament to the failing heater he'd been unable to fix for weeks. This shop, once a proud family business passed down from his late father, now stood on the brink of closure. Bills were piled high on a metal desk in the corner, each envelope demanding more than Matthew could spare. He glanced at the stack, scowling. Foreclosure hovered like an unwanted guest in his mind. Yet even with everything stacked against him, the man carried on with a quiet resolve. He had survived tours in Afghanistan as part of a motor pool support unit years ago. No bank statement or cold snap would break him. Still, he felt a looming dread. It had been a rough month. The small insurance payout from his wife's death years ago had drained away long ago. Piece by piece, medical bills, groceries, a new water heater when the old one died. He remembered how his daughter, Emma, now 12, had clutched his arm as the water flooded their small bathroom. "Dad, it's everywhere," she'd said, eyes wide with a panic that mirrored his own. He'd fixed it, of course, like he always tried to fix things. But some problems, like a failing business, needed more than just a wrench and determination. He let out a shaky breath and wandered to the front of the garage. The single glass door revealed swirling snow outside, the kind of flurries that made the roads treacherous. He checked his watch near closing time, but he knew no one was coming by tonight. The local folks tended to hunker down during storms. The last big job he'd seen was a routine oil change 4 days ago. That paid for the electric bill barely. Matthew thought of Emma, home alone with a stale box of cereal for dinner because payday was still a week away. She had insisted she was fine, but he felt an ache in his gut. "This can't go on," he whispered to himself. The truth was that if he lost this place, he wouldn't just lose a building. He'd lose the last vestige of his father's legacy and the only livelihood he could pass on to his daughter. Outside, a flash of headlights broke his reverie. A vehicle was barreling down the snow-packed street, moving too fast for the slick road conditions. He grabbed his coat and ran outside, hoping to wave them down before they skidded. But it was too late. With a sickening crunch and a squeal of twisted metal, the car veered off the road and hit a snowbank. Heart pounding, Matthew sprinted into the storm, boots crunching through powder that rose halfway to his calves. A swirl of wind slapped his face, stinging him awake. As he neared the wreck, he saw something that sent his pulse racing faster, the driver unconscious, pinned behind a deployed airbag. Matthew's military training kicked in. In Afghanistan, he'd seen vehicles overturned by IEDs and collisions, and had helped pull soldiers from burning trucks in the desert heat. This was different terrain and icy Colorado storm, but the same urgency crackled through him. He tugged open the driver's side door, fighting the wind and the twisted metal. The door groaned, nearly bent off its hinges, but he managed to pry it open with a grunt. Inside was a woman, mid-40s, with dark hair matted against her forehead. Tiny flecks of glass glittered in her hair like sinister snowflakes. Her breathing was shallow. Matthew noted a gash on her forehead, likely from the steering wheel or the side window. As gently as he could, he pressed 2 fingers to her neck, checking for a steady pulse. It was there, though faint. He leaned her seat back, careful about her spine, remembering every protocol hammered into him during his time in the service check airway. Breathing, circulation, minimize movement if there could be a neck or back injury. The vehicle was a black SUV, expensive from the look of the leather seats and the high-tech dashboard. The front end was buried in a snowbank. Steam hissed from beneath the crumpled hood. A faint odor of gasoline pricked his nostrils. Not good, he thought. If there's a fuel leak, or if the engine is close to overheating, this could become even more dangerous. The storm winds howled, pushing him sideways as he braced himself with one hand on the doorframe. He had to move the woman out. Carefully, he reached across her, feeling for the seatbelt release. After a couple tries, he found it. The belt snapped free, retracting with a hiss. He tried shaking her shoulder. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response but a flutter of eyelids. Time was short. He grabbed her under the arms, mindful of her neck. He was no paramedic, but he was the only help available. "I'm sorry," he muttered. Better a stiff shoulder than no chance at all. Half dragging, half lifting. He pulled her from the driver's seat, her boots scraping the snow. The wind threatened to tear them both off balance, but he dug in his heels. She let out a groan, eyelids flickering. He wanted to comfort her, but the priority was getting back to his garage out of the storm before the cold or the car's precarious condition put them in real jeopardy. He spared a glance back at the SUV, noticing the trunk area was also partially smashed. Something inside was rattling, and he saw a small flicker, maybe an electrical short. No time. He snapped at himself, turning away. He could come back for valuables later if it was safe. Right now, this woman's life mattered more. With a last burst of effort, he hoisted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, but that did little to ease his trembling muscles. The cold bit through his jacket, sweat already freezing at the nape of his neck. Gritting his teeth, he trudged step by laborious step toward the bright rectangle of light that was Cole's auto service. Snow whipped around them, and the wind carried his labored breaths away as soon as they formed. All that existed in that moment was the battered woman in his arms and the unwavering sense of duty that drove him forward. Kicking open the side door of his garage with his boot, Matthew carried the unconscious woman into the relative warmth of the shop. Warmth was a relative term, though the thermostat was set dangerously low to cut costs, and the ancient space heater in the corner barely offered more than a feeble glow. Still, inside was better than the howling storm outside. He laid her gently on an old vinyl sofa that served as his makeshift waiting area for customers who had become scarce in recent months. The woman's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she seemed to register her surroundings. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but only a shallow gasp escaped. Matthew crouched down, rummaging through his battered first aid kit, a relic from his army days. It held bandages, disinfectant, and a few other basics. He pressed a gauze pad gently to her forehead to staunch the bleeding. She winced, groaning softly. In that moment, he saw something in her eyes: fear, confusion, and maybe a spark of relief. "Hey," he said quietly, forcing calm into his voice. "You're okay now. My name's Matthew Cole. I found you in a wreck. You're at my garage." She tried to nod, but stopped with a sharp inhale. My name," her voice cracked. "Victoria. That's a good start." "Victoria," he said, continuing to dab at her wound. "Mind if I take a quick look at your arms? Legs need to see if you've got anything broken." She nodded again, eyes wide with pain. He gently felt along her shoulders and ribs, scanning for signs of fractures. Nothing felt too out of place, though she winced when he reached her collarbone. It might be bruised, possibly cracked. The adrenaline was still coursing through her. Shock could be masking worse damage, but at least she was lucid. Outside, the storm intensified, battering the garage door with rattles and groans. The overhead light flickered once, twice, as if debating whether to go out entirely. Matthew's lips pressed into a firm line. If the power cut, they'd be in the dark and lacking any real heat source to keep her stable. He stood up, grabbing a flashlight from his tool bench. Just a sec. Gotta check the generator. He clicked the flashlight on, stepping into the narrow storage area behind the main garage. The small generator was ancient, but he used it for emergencies like the winter storms that sometimes knocked out the entire grid for hours. He yanked the recoil handle, praying it would still start. The engine sputtered, coughed, then fell silent. Another try, and a third, until finally it roared to life with a sputtering drone. At least they'd have some backup power if the lines went down. Returning to the waiting area, he found Victoria struggling to sit upright. Her eyes were sharper now, scanning the grimy walls, the old posters of engine parts, the certificate naming Cole's Auto Service as the best local shop from nearly a decade ago. Where's my car?" she asked. Matthew grabbed a blanket from a nearby chair, one he used when clients had to wait in the cold. Draping it gently over her shoulders, he replied, "Still out there in the ditch, but I wouldn't worry about that right now. You need rest." She let out a shaky breath, nodding. Her gaze drifted to the swirling snow visible through the narrow window. "Thank you," she whispered, the faintest hint of vulnerability creeping into her tone. Matthew just nodded. He could see a million questions burning in her eyes. But for now, silence was the best remedy. They had the entire night ahead of them, trapped by the storm. They'd need their strength for whatever came next. The clang of metal on metal reverberated in the garage's hollow space as Matthew set up a portable heater closer to Victoria. He'd managed to drag the device out of a back closet, an older model, prone to shorting out, but better than nothing. The generator hummed in the background, occasionally sputtering like it might quit at any moment. Victoria leaned against the sofa's arm, one hand pressing a bandage to her temple. "How bad is it out there?" she asked, voice still shaky. Matthew shrugged. "Snow's coming down fast. We're looking at sub-zero wind chill by midnight. The roads are going to be impassable for a while." She closed her eyes for a moment. I was driving to Denver. Didn't realize the storm would hit so hard." Matthew almost chuckled. The meteorologists had been warning about this blizzard for days. Then again, people passing through these parts often assumed they could outrun nature. "You must have had an important reason," he said gently. "You from around here?" Victoria shook her head. "No. Business in Denver. Big meeting." She grimaced as if recalling something unpleasant. I tried to push through. A flicker of curiosity passed through him. Big meeting. Fancy SUV. She didn't look like a typical local. But the entire conversation was overshadowed by the immediate concern for her well-being. "You might have a mild concussion," he said, "so I wouldn't try to move too much." With that, Matthew gathered a makeshift pillow from old seat cushions and helped her prop up. She was still trembling, from either cold or shock. Possibly both. He'd seen it before, the body refusing to settle, adrenaline wearing off, leaving only pain. "Let me see if I can call for help," he muttered, fishing out his old cell phone. No signal. Typical of these mountains in the midst of a blizzard. He tried the landline phone in the garage's mini-office, dead. The lines must be down. Returning. He found Victoria's eyes closed, but she was breathing evenly. He draped another blanket over her, then headed toward the window, peering out at the swirling chaos. The SUV was a dark shape near the ditch, partially obscured by fresh drifts. There was no way he could tow it tonight, especially with his old wrecker offline. He'd sold parts of it months ago to pay the electric bill. He sighed, feeling the weight of the world pressing on him. Despite the adrenaline, exhaustion tugged at his limbs. Leaning against the workbench, he tried to gather his thoughts. Emma was safe at home, probably microwaving a bowl of canned soup or rummaging for any leftover sandwich fixings. But soon he'd have to check in. If the lines were down, he couldn't call her either. The thought made him uneasy. But he had little choice. He prayed Emma would be okay for one night. Victoria stirred, making him turn around. Her eyes flicked open, scanning the garage. I appreciate your help, she said softly. You didn't have to risk yourself. Matthew managed a half smile. In these parts, we watch out for each other. Old habit from my army days. Maybe. He paused. I'm sorry your night's turning out this way. Her gaze lowered. It's not your fault. Actually, I'm grateful. If you hadn't seen me, She trailed off, swallowing. The unspoken possibilities hung in the air: exposure, hypothermia, a catastrophic wreck. Matthew nodded. We'll get through the night. Once the storm settles, I'll see about getting you to a hospital or wherever you need to go. For now, though, they were two strangers bound by necessity, trapped in a battered garage with only a sputtering generator and a flickering heater for comfort, while nature raged unrelentingly outside. Morning came in a pale, gray hush. No brilliant sunrise to cut through the storm, only a softer swirl of snow drifting across the garage lot. The wind had diminished but left behind towering snowdrifts that dwarfed the front of the building. Inside, Matthew stirred awake in a folding chair. Every bone in his back ached. He dozed off around 4 in the morning after making sure Victoria was stable. Groaning, he stretched and glanced over to where she lay. To his relief, she was awake, propped against the sofa cushions, though a bruise now marred her left cheek, and dried blood clung to the bandage on her forehead. Her gaze looked more alert. Morning, he said quietly. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a train, she responded, attempting a wry smile that came off as a wince. But I'm alive. He nodded, walking over to check the generator's fuel gauge. It was low but still running. The heater was still providing a bubble of warmth in the shop. He exhaled with relief. Let me see if the phone lines are back. No luck, landline was still dead. He tried stepping outside through the side door. A wall of snow nearly up to his waist greeted him. He forced his way out, shivering as the frigid air gnawed at his face. The scene looked like an Arctic wasteland, with only the faint outline of rooftops in the distance. If a plow didn't come soon, they were effectively buried. Upon returning inside, he rubbed his hands together for warmth and checked on Victoria again. You need anything, Waterfood? Her stomach growled softly, which seemed to embarrass her. I guess I could eat. Matthew rummaged through a corner cabinet near his tool rack. He emerged with a can of vegetable soup in a small pot. Not exactly gourmet, he muttered, but it's calories. He set up a small portable stove, another relic from his army surplus days. Soon the tinny smell of warming soup filled the air. While it heated, Victoria carefully sat up more. So, you're a mechanic, but you mentioned army days. What was that like? He shrugged, stirring the soup with a plastic spoon. Motor pool. We patched up Jeeps, Humvees, anything that rolled. Served 2 tours, then came home when Emma, my daughter, was born. Went into business with my dad before he passed. A thoughtful look crossed her face. Emma. How old? 12, he replied, not hiding the hint of pride in his voice. She's at home right now. The roads were too bad for me to get back. I'm hoping she's okay. Victoria rubbed her arms beneath the blanket, as if remembering her own vulnerabilities. I'm sure she is. Kids are resilient. A flicker of sadness passed over her expression, but she said nothing more. Matthew poured the soup into a makeshift bowl. Here, he said, handing it to her. Their fingers brushed, and for an instant, he felt the tension in her grip like someone clutching a lifeline. He withdrew quickly, not wanting to intrude. She sipped the soup, grimacing at the bland flavor but grateful for the warmth. Outside, the wind began to pick up again, rattling the corrugated metal roof of the garage. It sounded like a warning. They were not out of danger yet. 2 hours later, Matthew stood at the edge of the property, shovel in hand, as he attempted to clear a path toward the main road. The biting air stung his lungs, but he pressed on, fueled by a desire to create some exit route if a rescue crew or snowplow rolled by. The storm had mostly passed, leaving behind a stark white landscape under a flat gray sky. Occasional gusts blew snow back into his face, forcing him to pause and blink furiously. Each shovel load felt heavier than the last, but a sliver of hope kept him going. He needed to check on Emma. The thought of her alone in their small, drafty house gnawed at him, a paternal worry that wouldn't subside until he knew she was safe. Still, he couldn't just abandon Victoria, who was clearly in no state to travel. She needed medical attention eventually, but for now, rest was the best remedy. Returning to the garage for a quick break, he found her attempting to stand on wobbly legs. "Hey, easy," he said, dropping the shovel near the door. "You'll undo what little recovery you've made." She shot him a determined glance. "I can't just sit here." She swayed slightly. He moved forward instinctively, steadying her by the elbow. A flicker of gratitude crossed her eyes. "You've got bruised ribs, maybe a crack in your collarbone. Trust me, I've had similar injuries. It's best not to push it." She bit her lip, clearly frustrated, but allowed him to help her sit back down on the sofa. "I hate feeling helpless." He offered a half smile. "I know the feeling." "But you're not helpless, just temporarily sidelined." She exhaled, a ragged sound. "I appreciate everything you're doing. I'll make sure you're compensated." A slight hardness crept into Matthew's eyes. "I'm not doing this for money. Don't worry about paying me back. Let's just get you better." She studied him, curiosity evident. "Why help me so much? You don't know me. I could be anybody." He hesitated. Memories of Afghanistan flooding back nights by a dusty roadside, helping villagers with broken vehicles because there was no one else. "Maybe that's exactly why," he said finally. "Because people are people, and we help each other when we can." Something shifted in her expression, but she said nothing. Outside, a faint rumble caught Matthew's attention. He perked up, stepping to the garage door and peering out. The sound repeated an engine's growl, far off, maybe a snowplow or a large truck. He grabbed the shovel again, hope flaring. "Stay here," he told Victoria. "I'm gonna see if that's help coming." He waded through the snow, scanning the road. Sure enough, a large snowplow was trudging along the main highway, orange lights flashing. Matthew waved both arms, but the driver either didn't see him or chose not to stop. In less than a minute, the plow had passed, leaving only churned-up ice and a howling wind in its wake. Disappointment sank like a stone in his gut. He trudged back to the garage, shoulders sagging. Victoria eyed him expectantly. He just shook his head. They didn't stop. The resignation in his voice was palpable. Still, he forced a wry smile. "At least the roads might clear up soon. Then I can get you to a hospital, see Emma, and figure out the next step." Victoria nodded, seeming to sense the tension in him. The morning's respite was over. Reality was pressing in on both of them again, and they still had no idea who each other truly was beyond this strange, storm-bound encounter. That afternoon, as gray clouds cloaked the sun, Matthew decided it was time to check on Victoria's car, or whatever remained of it. Perhaps there was a clue about how to contact her family or business associates. Maybe she had a phone with a signal booster. Even if the SUV was totaled, he might salvage something useful for her recovery or to get them out of this predicament. He grabbed his tool bag and trudged out, the snow up to his thighs now. Each step felt like walking through wet cement. By the time he reached the wreck, he was panting, his breath forming clouds. The SUV was half buried in a mound of snow drifted around it. The front end crumpled, windshield spiderwebbed with cracks, the side door crushed. Grimacing, he tried the passenger side. It yielded with a groan, allowing him to peer inside. The interior was a wreck, airbags deployed, seats stained with dried blood. He carefully rummaged through the glove compartment, a center console, hoping for a phone or ID. He found a sleek black phone screen shattered along with an expensive-looking purse. Inside the purse, a wallet containing the name Victoria Hawthorne, multiple credit cards, and a Sinclair Motors business card with her name listed as President and CEO. Matthew stared at the card, heart thumping. CEO of a major automotive corporation that explained the high-end SUV, perhaps her sense of urgency. It also changed the dynamic of who he was helping. He exhaled, momentarily overwhelmed by the realization that the woman resting on his ratty old sofa owned a company that probably had annual revenues larger than his entire town's economy. He pocketed the phone and wallet, also noticing a sleek black case in the back seat. The rear door refused to open, so he crawled across the center console. Inside the case were neatly filed documents with Sinclair Motors letterhead blueprints, financial projections, something about an upcoming Denver initiative. Deciding it wasn't his business to snoop further, he shut the case. He also found a suitcase that had popped open, clothes scattered. He gathered what he could in a hurry. The wind stung his exposed skin, and he felt moisture seep into his boots. Struggling back out of the SUV, he closed the door as best he could, though it didn't latch properly. Before leaving, he cast one more look at the engine. The battered front was dripping fluid that smelled like coolant, maybe a cracked radiator. It was beyond roadside repairs. Sighing, he turned back toward the garage, bracing himself for the uphill battle in the deep snow. By the time he returned, his cheeks were numb, and his thighs burned from the exertion. Inside, Victoria was awake, sipping water from a plastic cup. He set the items down on the workbench phone: purse, suitcase, the black case. Her eyes flicked from him to the salvage. "I guess I owe you some explanations," she murmured. Matthew just nodded, though he couldn't hide the swirl of questions in his mind. Why was a powerful CEO driving alone through a blizzard? Why take such a huge risk, and what might happen once she realized the severity of his own financial troubles, which contrasted so starkly with her corporate wealth? Victoria's gaze landed on the black case, her jaw tightening. She nodded toward it. "That's, sensitive material. Company stuff." Matthew lifted his hands in a defensive gesture. "I didn't read any of it. Just saw it was from Sinclair Motors." She exhaled. "I suppose you saw my cards, too." He shrugged. "I did. CEO. Huh. That's a big title." A pause stretched between them. The hum of the generator punctuated the silence, along with the distant whistle of wind through unseen gaps in the garage's structure. Finally, she spoke. "Yes, I run Sinclair Motors, but I'm not here on some fancy excursion. I was trying to reach Denver for a crucial meeting about a new facility." "Negotiations," she said, gesturing vaguely to the stack of papers. "We have a big project in the works, and the timeline is tight." Matthew digested this. A crucial meeting. He thought of the battered SUV. "So you decided to drive yourself through a blizzard." A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "My flight got canceled. I had no private jet available last minute, and I couldn't afford to delay this. A competitor is breathing down our necks. I had to be there." He nodded slowly, not unsympathetic. He too knew the feeling of deadlines and desperation, albeit on a smaller scale. "Look, you don't need to explain everything," he said, placing a hand on the black case. "I just wanted to see if you had a working phone. Yours is smashed." She sank back into the sofa, pressing her palm to her forehead. That phone was top of the line. Figures. Matthew's eyes flicked to her bandages. The swelling on her cheek was more pronounced. "You need to rest. I can rummage around for some painkillers over-the-counter stuff I keep for first aid." "Thank you," she whispered, truly sounding grateful. He retrieved a small bottle of ibuprofen from the first aid kit. As he handed it over with a cup of water, their eyes met. He hesitated, then said, "Listen, I realize now you're not just some random traveler, but that doesn't change my approach. You're hurt. I'm helping you." End of story. Something softened in her expression. "Not many people would do what you've done. They might call for paramedics and leave it at that." He chuckled without humor. "I would if I could, but we're off-grid right now." She nodded. Then, "Let me do something. Let me pay you for your troubles, or at least for the damage you've taken on." "This place, She looked around at the peeling paint, the outdated equipment. I can see you're struggling. Matthew set his jaw. A part of him bristled at the suggestion that he was a charity case. Another part, the pragmatic father in him, recognized that maybe fate had delivered a possible lifeline. I won't say I don't need help, he admitted carefully, but let's talk about that when you're better. I'm not looking for handouts. Victoria lowered her eyes. I respect that, but I owe you more than a thank you. That's for sure. As she swallowed the pills and leaned back, Matthew forced himself to breathe. He couldn't let false pride sabotage the one potential break he'd seen in years. Yet he also couldn't let this powerful CEO overshadow his own sense of dignity. For now, they remained on unequal footing, each holding keys to the other's immediate future. That evening, the sky outside turned a bruised purple as the sun dipped beyond the snow-covered hills. A quiet lull fell over the garage. Despite the generator's hum and the faint pop of the space heater, it felt oddly tranquil, as if the storm had left a hush in its wake. Matthew cleared a spot on his metal desk, setting out 2 cups of instant coffee he'd scavenged from his emergency supplies. He beckoned Victoria over with a nod. She rose slowly, every movement tinged with stiffness. Coffee, she said, arching a brow at the label on the packet. Well, it's something. He gave a faint smile. Caffeine is caffeine. Right. They clinked their plastic cups in a mock toast, then sipped the lukewarm, bitter liquid. For a few moments, they sat in companionable silence, the kind that forms when 2 strangers share an improbable situation. Eventually, Matthew spoke, voice low. When the road's clear, I need to get home. My daughter. I hate leaving her alone. She's a good kid, but still, at the same time, I have to make sure you're safe. You need a checkup, maybe an X-ray. Victoria nodded, wincing as she adjusted her posture. I understand. I don't want to keep you from your family. Honestly, as soon as I can, I'll arrange transport or have my people come get me. He almost laughed at the phrase, my people. That was a world away from how he operated, but he tamped down the humor, focusing instead on her next words. You mentioned the name Emma, she said gently. Tell me about her. Matthew's face lit up despite himself. Emma's 12, smart as a whip. She wants to be an engineer someday, always tinkering with the gadgets around the house. She's braver than I was at that age, that's for sure. A soft smile curved Victoria's lips. She sounds incredible. You're lucky. He glanced at the battered pictures taped to the desk photos of Emma at various ages, each more precious than the last. Yeah, I'm lucky. A flicker of sadness crossed his face. Her mom passed when Emma was a toddler. Cancer. Victoria's gaze dropped. I'm sorry. He shrugged, though a heaviness settled in his voice. It was rough, but we managed. That's partly why I left the army. Emma needed me full-time, not half a world away. She reached out, almost placing a hand on his forearm, but stopped. I get that. Sometimes life reorders our priorities. He looked at her. What about you, family? Victoria hesitated. My parents are gone. No siblings. Married once. But it fell apart years ago. Guess I got too wrapped up in building Sinclair Motors. Or maybe we both gave up too soon. She sighed. Work became my life, for better or worse. Their eyes met in a moment of unspoken empathy. 2 people who'd lost something, a partner, a sense of normalcy, and were forging ahead in different ways. The generator sputtered, drawing both their gazes momentarily. Then the faint hum steadied. They finished their coffees in reflective silence, each weighed down by memories, yet oddly comforted by the presence of another person who understood loss. The snow outside glowed faintly in the fading light, hinting at a new dawn and new complications they had yet to face. By the second morning, the sky was a wan slate, and the temperature had dropped even further. Matthew could see his breath form small clouds in front of him, and the portable heater's meager warmth felt like a candle against an iceberg. He woke early, rummaging through the shop's storage for anything remotely useful: extra blankets, a propane stove, leftover canned goods. Victoria awoke soon after, forehead creased with pain. Her bruises had turned a deep purple, and the bandage on her temple needed changing. Matthew approached cautiously, holding fresh gauze. "Time to swap out that dressing," he said, voice gentle. She nodded, bracing for discomfort. With practiced precision, he peeled back the soiled bandage and cleaned the wound with antiseptic. She hissed through her teeth, but let him work. Underneath, the gash looked painful but not infected. "You're healing," he said softly. She gave a tight-lipped smile. "I guess that's something." Once bandaged, Victoria carefully tried to stand. This time, she managed a few steps around the garage without buckling. She paused by the window, peering out at the endless white. "The roads still look awful," she murmured. "You really think we can get out of here soon?" Matthew shrugged. "I've been checking. No sign of plows coming back. They likely cleared the main highways, but not these side roads. Could be a day or two more." Her eyes flickered with frustration. "My meeting in Denver is tomorrow morning. I'm going to lose a major deal. This could cost the company millions." And she stopped, biting back the rest of her words. "I sound ungrateful. Here you are, giving me shelter, and I'm whining about money." Matthew approached, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder only for a second. "Hey, it's your life. It's important to you. No shame in that. But let's be real. You got in an accident. You might have a fractured collarbone or worse. A deal isn't worth risking your life." She sighed. "Easy to say when it's not your job on the line, or your board of directors breathing down your neck. They already question if I'm pushing too hard, taking too many risks. Now they'll have even more reason to doubt me." Matthew considered her for a long moment. In the flicker of the overhead light, she looked both resolute and vulnerable, like someone who'd carried burdens in silence for too long. "You seem tough enough to handle them," he said, an attempt at reassurance. "And if they don't see your worth, that's their mistake." A faint laugh escaped her lips. "You have no idea." He offered a ghost of a smile. "Maybe not, but I've seen how you handle yourself in a crisis. Pretty impressive for a CEO in high heels." She raised a brow. "I wasn't wearing heels in that SUV, for the record." He chuckled, albeit softly. "Right. Sorry. Just the mental image." Outside, a gust of wind rattled the walls, reminding them the storm still had a voice. Inside, the generator chugged along, though the fuel supply was dwindling. They'd have to make a move soon or risk losing power entirely. Victoria turned from the window. "You keep saying we, like you're part of this, too." Matthew shrugged. "We're in it together, for better or worse, until the roads open up or help arrives. And I've got Emma to think about. So yeah, we—" She nodded, seeming oddly comforted by that small word. For the moment, they shared a flicker of hope in the midst of an unrelenting winter. Despite the tension and the underlying storms, both literal and metaphorical, a sense of routine began to form. By midday, Matthew had boiled water on the propane stove to make a rudimentary meal of instant noodles. Victoria ate slowly, wincing at each swallow. He guessed her throat might be bruised from the impact with the airbag. Between spoonfuls, she glanced at the suitcase he'd salvaged. "I should try to change into something warmer," she said. "The clothes I've got on are stiff with dried blood." Matthew nodded, handing her the suitcase. "I'll look the other way. Promise," he joked gently. She managed a small grin, retrieving a gray sweater and black leggings that looked more practical than the attire she'd been wearing. He stepped away, busying himself with stoking the heater, giving her a semblance of privacy. The sound of rustling fabric reminded him of how makeshift and intimate this crisis felt. Two strangers sharing a cramped, frigid space with no option but trust. Once changed, Victoria emerged from behind a partition. She looked marginally more comfortable. "Better," she said, though her eyes still betrayed pain. She walked over to the black case that contained her important documents. carefully opening it. Matthew noticed how her expression hardened. She flipped through pages of corporate jargon he didn't fully understand. "I was supposed to finalize these contracts tomorrow," she murmured, half to herself. "We're expanding into electric truck manufacturing in Denver. It's a huge step for the company, bridging commercial lines with green energy. If I don't appear at that meeting, the investors might back out." Matthew let that sink in. "Seems like you've got a lot riding on your shoulders," she snorted softly. "That's an understatement. People think being CEO is all private jets and fancy dinners. They don't see the sleepless nights, the endless negotiations, the board that's ready to pounce on any sign of weakness." She hesitated. "Look at me, complaining again. You've got your own problems." He didn't deny it. "Yeah, the garage is barely hanging on. I can't pay the bills, can't keep up with taxes. If something doesn't change soon, I'll lose this place." A silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the heater. She closed the case and turned to face him. "What if I help you?" He blinked, not sure he heard her correctly. "Help me how I have resources, connections. I could invest in your shop, upgrade your equipment, give you a fresh start. In return, maybe you consult for Sinclair in some capacity." She gestured to the battered certificate on the wall. "I can tell you're good at what you do. Maybe the company needs that kind of practical expertise." His stomach nodded. Part of him wanted to leap at the opportunity. Another part bristled, pride flaring. "I'm not looking for charity." She shook her head, a spark of passion in her eyes. "It wouldn't be charity. It'd be a business arrangement. You help me with a grassroots perspective, real mechanics insights for the new line. I help you get back on your feet." He studied her, searching for any hint of pity. Instead, he found determination. She wasn't just handing out money, she was proposing a partnership. Yet the words stuck in his throat. Could it be that simple? Before he could respond, the lights flickered again. A mechanical sputter echoed from the generator room, followed by a sudden silence. The overhead bulb dimmed, then extinguished, leaving them in cold, half-lit twilight. They both froze. The generator had finally died. Darkness thickened in the garage, broken only by the hazy winter light filtering through the frosted windows. A sharp chill crept in as the heater too lost power. Matthew cursed under his breath, grabbing a flashlight and hurrying to the side room where the generator was set up. Victoria trailed after him, arms wrapped protectively around her ribs. The generator stood silent, a faint smell of burned rubber or wiring emanating from it. Matthew crouched, flicking the switches, yanking the recoil cord. It gave a few weak gasps, then nothing. Fuel was low, and perhaps something else had failed a belt, a fuse, or the old coil he'd meant to replace. "Damn it," he muttered. "Without the generator, we've got no heat, no lights." Victoria frowned, visibly trembling. "Is there any way to fix it?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Might be, but it could take hours to diagnose. And even then, I might need parts I don't have. We're basically stuck with flashlights and blankets unless we figure something else out." They retreated to the main area, the air already feeling noticeably colder. A sense of urgency buzzed through Matthew. They could last maybe a day or two in these frigid conditions if they conserved body heat. But Victoria was still injured, and neither of them had eaten a decent meal in days. "I'll try to see if there's any spare parts around," Matthew said, rummaging through a tool chest. "I can at least attempt to fix the coil or the spark plug in the generator." Victoria nodded, kneeling gingerly to help search. She lifted lids off boxes, scanned shelves. The overhead gloom made it hard to see more than silhouettes of rusted metal and old gear. Their flashlight beams danced across dusty corners, revealing spider webs and the neglected skeletons of obsolete machines. Minutes turned into an hour, and the temperature continued its slow, merciless drop. Their breath formed clouds in the stale air. Finally, Matthew let out a resigned sigh. "I've got a spark plug that might fit, but not the coil I need." Even if I try to jerry-rig something, it's not guaranteed. Victoria shivered. Try anyway. Please. He nodded. I will, but let's also think about staying warm another way. We can pile blankets. Keep the door shut. Maybe use the propane stove carefully for some heat. It's risky indoors, but if we ventilate properly, it might help. Despite her exhaustion, Victoria helped gather every blanket and large sheet of plastic they could find. They created a small enclosed space near the sofa, hanging the plastic as a barrier to trap heat. It resembled a makeshift fort, crude, but might keep them alive. They set the propane stove near an open window for ventilation, lighting it to provide a little warmth. As they huddled together, the space heater useless without power. Matthew's mind whirled with the precariousness of their situation. If help didn't come soon, or if the stove ran out of fuel, they'd be forced to attempt a trek through the snow. But Victoria, with her injuries, might not make that journey without risking further harm. He glanced at her as she wrapped a blanket tighter around her shoulders, her teeth chattering despite the feeble warmth. In that moment, he felt a fierce protectiveness. He'd always been the caretaker first for his men in the army, then for Emma, now for this woman who, by all rights, shouldn't be in such dire straits but was. We'll figure it out, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Night fell, turning the windows into black mirrors that reflected the faint glow of the propane stove and their anxious faces. They took turns dozing, neither able to fully sleep. Matthew woke at one point to find Victoria staring at him in the dim flicker of flame. Her face held a complex mix of gratitude, worry, and something else he couldn't name. Outside, the wind had calmed, making the silence inside the garage eerie. No generator hum, no traffic, not even a dog's distant bark. This quiet felt like being on another planet, isolated from any civilization. Around midnight, Matthew tried once more to coax the generator to life. He replaced the spark plug, checked the wires, even improvised a coil fix with old scraps. But each pull of the recoil handle ended in a hollow sputter. The machine refused to cooperate, a mechanical middle finger to his best efforts. He trudged back to the makeshift plastic enclosure. Heart heavy, Victoria looked up at him, a question in her eyes. He shook his head. No luck. She swallowed hard. Then, we can't stay like this forever. How long until the propane runs out? He checked the gauge on the small tank. We've got maybe 2 days if we're stingy. Her expression grew distant. If I could just contact my assistant, she'd send a rescue helicopter. For God's sake. Matthew almost laughed at the absurdity of that possibility. A rescue helicopter in these mountains wasn't impossible, but it felt surreal. Our phones are dead. The landline is shot, and we can't reach a cell tower. We might have no choice but to dig our way out or hope the plows come by again. She rubbed her forehead. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. He shook his head. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to help. They lapsed into a tense silence. It was the quiet of two people nearing the end of their rope, yet unwilling to surrender. Through the darkness, Matthew thought of Emma and felt a pang of guilt. She must be worried sick, or maybe she believed he was simply stuck at the shop. If only he could reassure her. Then, out of nowhere, Victoria's voice broke the stillness. What you did for me, pulling me out of that wreck. I won't forget it. When we get out of here, I'll repay you, whether you like it or not. He managed a weary smile. Repayment is the last thing on my mind right now. The propane flame sputtered, making shadows jump on the wall. For a moment, they locked eyes. In the flicker, the distance between them, CEO and mechanic, corporate magnate and small-town father, seemed to dissolve, replaced by a shared vulnerability. Matthew sighed, rubbing his temples. Get some rest, he said softly. Tomorrow, if the weather holds, I might try to walk to the highway, see if I can flag someone down. She opened her mouth to protest, but then caught the resolve in his gaze and closed it again. Neither had any illusions about the danger trekking alone in sub-zero temperatures on unplowed roads was a gamble, but it might be their only shot at rescue before their fragile resources gave out. Dawn broke pale and grudging, as if the world itself was too tired to fully wake. Matthew was up first, gathering supplies in a small backpack, bottled water, protein bars, a flashlight, spare gloves, and a heavier coat. Victoria stirred from the sofa, blinking groggily. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice still hoarse with sleep. He tightened the straps on the pack. "I'm going to try to reach the main road, see if it's passable. Maybe I'll find someone with a working phone or get to a spot with coverage." Concern etched lines on her forehead. "You'll freeze out there. It's a risk," he admitted. "But we can't just sit here and hope for a miracle. The generator's shot, and we have limited propane. You're hurt, and I can't fix that. If I can find a plow driver or a passing truck, maybe we can get an ambulance for you." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm not on death's doorstep," she said, trying to sound tough. "But I see your point." He grabbed an old map from the desk drawer, showing logging roads and local highways. "It's about 4 miles to the nearest main road. If I cut across the fields, if I can make it there, maybe I'll find traffic or even walk until I hit a gas station. Worst case, I turn around if it's impassable." Victoria struggled to her feet, crossing to him. "Then take my coat, the heavier one in the suitcase, and some extra socks. Cold feet can kill you faster than you think." Her sudden authoritative tone made him blink, but he nodded, rummaging through her suitcase. Indeed, she had a thick, insulated coat, fashionable, but apparently high-end winter gear. He pulled it on over his own jacket. It felt stiff and a bit snug across his shoulders, but it would help keep the wind out. They moved to the garage door. He paused, turning to her. "Keep the stove running as little as possible, just enough so you don't freeze. If the wind picks up, seal yourself in the plastic enclosure." "You got it." She nodded, hugging herself. "Be careful." In that moment, a ripple of emotion passed between them: concern, gratitude, fear. They had grown closer in this short time, bound by necessity and a shared vulnerability. He gently touched her arm, then turned to the door. The blast of cold air that hit him as he stepped out was sobering, a physical slap that reminded him how risky this was. Snow crunched underfoot, each step sinking knee-deep. He gripped his shovel, forging a path away from the garage, heading in the general direction of the main road. His body was stiff from days of minimal sleep and the stress of survival, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Behind him, he could feel Victoria's eyes on his back. He didn't turn around. If he did, he might lose the fragile resolve that kept his legs moving. He just kept walking, the wind stinging his cheeks, his breath steaming like a locomotive. Emma's face flashed in his mind, her bright eyes, her grin when he fixed her bike. That was all the motivation he needed to keep going, step by step, into the white expanse. The cold felt sharper the farther Matthew ventured from the garage, as if nature itself were warning him to turn back. Each gust seemed to slice through the layers of coats, gloves, and scarves, chilling him to the core. Still, he pressed on, guided by the map tucked in his jacket pocket. The world around him was eerily silent, the vast fields and rolling hills blanketed in fresh snow. The sky was a uniform gray, making it difficult to discern where the land ended and the horizon began. Occasionally, he stumbled over a fence buried beneath drifts, or into a small ditch he failed to spot. Each misstep was punishing, costing him precious energy. He paused to catch his breath, pulling out the water bottle for a quick sip. The water was partially frozen, slushy. He forced it down, telling himself to keep hydrated. The road had to be ahead somewhere, just a mile or two more, if the map was right. After another half-hour of trudging, he reached a bend in the landscape that looked slightly familiar from the topographic lines on the map. With renewed vigor, he pressed on, cresting a small rise. Then he saw it, the faint outline of the main road, a broad, snow-covered expanse flanked by tree lines. Relief surged in him. but it was tempered by the realization that no vehicles were in sight. The road itself looked half cleared, as if a plow had come through, but then drifted over again by overnight winds. Still, it was a start. If he could follow the road, perhaps he'd find a gas station or an intersection. His legs ached, his thighs quivering with each step. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself onward, scanning for any sign of life. Minutes bled into an hour. At last, in the distance, he spotted the shape of a vehicle, a pickup truck. It was parked near a fence, maybe 200 yards off the road. Was it stuck? Or had the driver stepped away? He quickened his pace, adrenaline giving him a final push. When he reached the truck, he discovered it was abandoned tires flat, interior empty, no footprints around. A sense of disappointment and anxiety welled up. This was a dead end. No immediate help here. But he did notice a small farm lane leading beyond the fence. Maybe a house was nearby. He pried at the fence gate, which was locked, so he climbed over it, nearly slipping on the icy rungs. On the other side, he followed the lane about a quarter mile until, through the trees, a barn and farmhouse came into view. Smoke curled from the farmhouse chimney. Someone was home. His heart hammered with relief. He stumbled the last stretch to the front porch, coughing out clouds of vapor. A dog barked inside. Within moments, the door cracked open, revealing a middle-aged man bundled in a flannel shirt. He eyed Matthew warily. Matthew raised a trembling hand. "I'm stranded," he managed, voice rough. "Wreck. Injured woman. My garage. Can't reach help. Please." The man's eyes widened. He glanced behind him, likely checking for family, then nodded. "All right, come in. Let's see what we can do." With that, Matthew stepped inside the warm farmhouse, relief mingling with worry for Victoria. He'd found help. But would it be enough? And would it arrive in time? Matthew stumbled into the farmhouse's rustic foyer, grateful for the warmth seeping from a wood-burning stove in the adjacent living room. The middle-aged man who had let him in introduced himself as Dale Parker, a local rancher with a firm handshake and a guarded expression. Flicking on a lantern, Dale motioned for Matthew to take off his snow-caked coat and boots. The place smelled of pine, leather, and the lingering aroma of stew. A couple of curious dogs hovered nearby, tails wagging uncertainly. "Sit. Warm up," Dale said, pointing to a chair near the stove. "You look about ready to keel over." Matthew lowered himself onto the chair, feeling the heat against his numbed extremities. His fingers throbbed with that painful pins and needles sensation as circulation returned. Clearing his throat, he recounted the essentials. "I run a garage a few miles northeast of here. Got stuck there during the storm. There's a woman injured who needs medical help. Our generator died. No phone lines. Couldn't call for rescue." Dale crossed his arms, brow furrowed. "Storm took out the lines around here." "Two? I've been waiting for the county to fix them, but no sign yet. Cell coverage is spotty. My phone only works if I hike up the ridge behind the barn." "So you do have a cell phone?" Matthew asked, hope flickering. "Yeah, but it's old. Battery's dead right now. I've got a charger that runs off my truck's cigarette lighter, but the truck got stuck in a snowdrift yesterday." Matthew let out a heavy sigh, the brief hope dimming. "Could we get your truck free? I can help." Dale scratched his chin. "Possibly. Snow's still deep, but if we shovel enough, we might move it. Then I can power the phone, try to get a signal, but it'll take work and time." Time was the last thing Matthew felt he could spare. Still, it was a path forward. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. "My friend back at the garage. She's stable for now, but we can't wait days." Dale nodded, his stern face betraying a flicker of sympathy. "I get it. Family man myself. My wife's in town with her sister, but I stayed behind to keep an eye on the animals. Let's get you something hot to eat, then we'll tackle the truck." It was a kindness Matthew didn't want to refuse. Hunger gnawed at him, and the warmth made his eyelids heavy. Still, he forced himself to stay sharp. Victoria was back there, alone, injured, and possibly running out of propane for heat. He couldn't rest too long. In the kitchen, Dale ladled steaming venison stew into a bowl. The savory scent nearly brought tears to Matthew's eyes as he realized how depleted he was. Between spoonfuls, he explained more about the broken generator, about how Victoria had crashed her SUV, about the few supplies left at the garage. He was careful not to drop her full name or mention her CEO status. It felt too complicated, and in this life-or-death situation, it hardly mattered who she was on paper. Dale listened intently, chewing the inside of his cheek as if weighing the next steps. When Matthew finished the bowl, Dale rose. "All right, let's go see about that truck." Daylight's burning. An hour later, the two men trudged through knee-deep snow, reaching the spot where Dale's pickup truck lay half-buried beneath a glistening drift. Gusts of wind whipped at their faces, though not as fiercely as during the height of the storm. The truck was an older model, the front end tilted in a shallow ditch. Shovels in hand, they began the laborious task of clearing snow from around the tires and undercarriage. Each heave of the shovel sent a jolt of pain through Matthew's shoulders, still stiff from days of sleeping upright and trekking miles. Dale, wiry and tough, worked in grim silence, only pausing occasionally to wipe sweat from his brow despite the cold. They formed a slow, steady rhythm: scoop, toss, step, repeat, carving out a path for the truck to roll free. Between grunts of effort, Matthew's mind whirled with thoughts of Victoria. He worried about her injuries, her potential hypothermia if the propane stove failed. A pang of guilt gnawed at him. What if leaving her alone had been the wrong choice? But logically, he knew there was no alternative. Staying in the garage together would only guarantee they both became stranded longer. When the truck's tires finally emerged from the bank, Dale clambered into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life in a plume of exhaust. "Yes," he shouted over the rumble. Matthew rushed around to the passenger side, flinging the door open. Dale motioned for him to climb in. "We'll back it out carefully," he said, shifting into reverse. Matthew watched the wheels spin, whining against the icy ground. A moment later, the truck lurched backward, inch by inch, until it found traction. Elated, they managed to get the truck onto a firmer portion of the driveway. Dale kept the engine running, plugging in his old flip phone to the cigarette lighter charger. It blinked to life, showing a nearly depleted battery icon. "I'll let it charge for a while," he explained, leaning back in the seat. "Then we can try walking to the ridge if we still can't get a signal here." A wave of relief washed over Matthew, but it was tinged with urgency. "While it charges, maybe we can get to your barn roof or that ridge. The higher up, the better the odds." Dale nodded, pulling on gloves and stepping out. "Let's do it." They climbed a gentle slope behind the barn, slipping occasionally on hidden patches of ice. The effort kept them warm, though each breath stung. At the top of the ridge, the view unfolded rolling farmland, forests heavy with snow, and in the distance, a glimmer of a plowed highway. Dale flipped open his phone, watching the screen intently. At first, there was no signal, just a taunting, searching message. But then, miraculously, a single bar appeared. Dale quickly dialed the local county sheriff's number, pressing the phone to his ear. The call connected, though the voice on the other end crackled in and out. "This is Dale Parker, out on Cloverfield Ranch. Got a man here. Says there's an injured woman stuck at a garage near the Eastern Loop Road. Can we get an ambulance or search crew?" Matthew waited with bated breath, straining to hear the muffled reply. Dale cupped a hand around the phone, trying to shield it from the wind. "Yes, the roads are passable on the main highways, but side roads are still a mess. The place is about 4 miles from my property, off County Route 14. Name's Cole's Auto Service." A pause, static hissing. Then more words crackled through. Dale nodded. "All right, do what you can. Thanks, Sheriff." He ended the call, exhaling a cloud of vapor. Sheriff says they'll try to send a snowcat or at least a heavy-duty rescue truck, but it might take a few hours, maybe more. They're understaffed, dealing with wrecks all over the county. Matthew closed his eyes in relief. Even if the timetable was uncertain, at least the authorities knew now. That's all we can ask, he murmured. Thank you, Dale. They descended the ridge, slipping a few times on the icy path. Back at the barn, Dale parked the truck near a feed shed, leaving the engine idling so the phone could continue to charge. Exhaust curled into the cold air as the two men leaned against the barn's wooden wall, catching their breath. How about you wait here, Dale suggested. I'll feed my livestock. Keep an ear on the phone if the sheriff calls back. You look dead on your feet. Matthew bristled at the idea of resting while Victoria was waiting for rescue, but his legs felt like rubber, and the chill had soaked into his bones. Yeah, he conceded, but just for a moment. Then I need to head back to her. You sure that's wise? Dale asked, arching an eyebrow. You nearly froze getting here. If help is on its way, maybe let them pick you both up. A swirl of conflicting thoughts took hold in Matthew's mind. He remembered the meager supplies in the garage, the possibility of the propane running out. What if Victoria took a turn for the worse? He felt a powerful pull to return, to make sure she was okay, even if that meant meeting the rescue teams on the road. Finally, he exhaled. I can't just sit idle. The rescue might not come for hours. If I can at least get back to her, I can keep her warm, keep her spirits up. Dale rubbed his jaw, considering, all right, we can load your pack with some supplies, extra blankets, a bit more food. You can take my phone, too, once it has enough juice. Maybe you'll catch a signal at certain spots. Matthew felt a rush of gratitude. That'd be a lifesaver. Thank you. True to his word, Dale fetched a small stack of blankets from the farmhouse, along with vacuum-sealed jerky and a big thermos of piping hot coffee. He stuffed them into a sturdy backpack, then handed the phone now at half battery to Matthew. You're a good man, Matthew said, voice tinged with emotion. Just doing what neighbors do, Dale replied, shrugging. Go carefully. The sun'll be gone soon. If you're not at that garage by nightfall, you risk losing your bearings. Make sure you watch for landmarks. Matthew nodded, steeling himself. The journey back would be just as grueling, and he was already exhausted. But the image of Victoria's bruised face and the responsibility he felt for her well-being fueled his resolve. He slung the pack over his shoulders, thanked Dale one last time, and set off, trudging into the snowy expanse with measured steps, the phone in his pocket and hope in his heart. The trek back to Cole's auto service felt twice as long as before. Every footfall seemed to drain what little stamina Matthew had left, and the afternoon sun hung low, casting elongated shadows over the snowy fields. He pressed on, guided by fences, clusters of trees, and the occasional flash of memory from his earlier route. Halfway there, he paused to sip coffee from the thermos. The hot liquid seared his throat, jolting him awake. As he trudged forward again, his thoughts circled around Emma. He pictured her sitting at home, maybe reading an old library book or fiddling with some broken gadget. A pang of guilt resurfaced. He'd hardly considered how frightened she might be. With no word from him for days, but he had to save Victoria first, one crisis at a time. After what felt like an eternity, he recognized the gentle slope leading down toward the backside of the garage property. Relief rushed through him. He glanced at Dale's phone, pressing the power button. No signal bars. Figures. He'd just have to rely on the rescue teams finding them. As he neared the garage, the shape of Victoria's SUV came into view, still half buried and battered in the ditch. Snow had drifted around it again. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather prickled his spine. What if Victoria had tried to walk out and collapsed? He quickened his pace, practically sliding down the slope. Bursting through the garage's side door, he shouted, "Victoria!" No immediate response. The interior was dim, only faint daylight seeping through the grimy windows. The propane stove had gone out. His heart hammered. He dropped the backpack, Fumbling for a flashlight, the beam danced over the silent work area, revealing tools scattered on the floor as if someone had knocked them over. Then a soft sound, a moan, came from behind a plastic sheet they'd hung. He rushed forward, pulling it aside. There she was, curled up on the sofa, teeth chattering, eyes fluttering open at his commotion. Her face was pale, lips tinged with blue. He nearly collapsed beside her in relief. God, Victoria, are you all right? She tried to speak, but only managed a shaky whisper. Her injuries and the cold had sapped her energy. Matt swiftly wrapped 2 blankets from his pack around her, then tore open the jerky package. You need to eat something. I have coffee too. It's still hot. Her eyes lit up with a faint spark at the mention of coffee. He poured a small amount into the thermos lid and helped her sip it. She let out a trembling breath. I thought you might not come back. His throat constricted. I promised. Didn't I? She gave a half nod, letting the warmth of the coffee seep through her. He explained how he'd found a rancher, called the sheriff, and how rescue was hopefully on its way. Tears of relief glistened in her eyes, though she tried to blink them back. I was about to risk walking myself, she said, voice cracking, but I couldn't even stand. Matthew gently squeezed her hand. You did the right thing staying put. He checked her forehead, still warm, but not feverish. It was likely just the cold and pain. Hang on, he said, voice determined. We're almost out of this mess. Late afternoon dimmed into an eerie twilight that painted the interior of the garage in bluish tones. Matthew rigged up a small flame with the propane stove, using the last dregs of the tank carefully, just enough to keep a pocket of warmth in their plastic enclosure. He periodically checked Dale's phone, hoping for a signal or an incoming call, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. Victoria dozed fitfully, occasionally startling awake with a groan. He'd given her a couple more ibuprofen tablets, which dulled the worst of her pain. Now he studied her face in the flicker of the stove's light. The bruise on her cheek had darkened, and her collarbone looked swollen. He wished he had more medical supplies, but this was the best he could do. Somewhere outside, a distant rumble caught his ear. He sat up straighter, heart pounding. Could that be the rescue team? He scrambled to his feet, careful not to disrupt the plastic barrier. Rushing to the garage window, he peered out at the snow-swept lot. Another rumble, closer this time. Then, the unmistakable glare of headlights cutting through the twilight. Victoria, he called, voice trembling with excitement. I think they're here. He flung open the side door, stepping outside just as a giant truck outfitted with tank-like treads rolled in. Painted on the side were the County Emergency Services insignia. Matthew waved both arms, adrenaline coursing through him. The vehicle halted, and a pair of bundled-up rescuers jumped out. One of them, a stocky woman with a medic patch on her jacket, raised a hand in greeting. You, Matthew Cole. He nodded vigorously, gesturing toward the building. She's inside, Victoria. Injured, possibly broken collarbone, definitely battered up. We've been stuck here without power for 2 days. The medic signaled to her partner, who grabbed a medical bag from the vehicle. They followed Matthew inside, making quick work of assessing Victoria's condition. The medic checked her vitals, scrawling notes on a clipboard. She's stable, but we need to get her to a hospital for imaging. Could be some fractures. A wave of relief and worry swept over Matthew as they helped Victoria stand. She managed a shaky smile in his direction, eyes gleaming with gratitude. You made it happen, she whispered. Matthew swallowed hard, brushing aside a surge of emotion. Damn right I did. Let's get you out of here. They escorted her to the rescue truck, which resembled a small tank with a cab. She winced climbing in, but the medics supported her gently. Matthew lingered by the door, waiting to see if there was room for him too. The other rescuer, a lanky man with a notepad, turned to Matthew. We can only carry one passenger comfortably. We're taking her to the hospital in Oakville. Another vehicle will be by soon for you. Or if you want to follow in your own truck, Matthew's mind spun. He didn't have a working truck, And even if he did, the roads were still rough. But the thought of staying behind again while Victoria went alone felt wrong. She sensed his hesitation. "Go to your daughter," she said softly, reading his thoughts. "I'll be okay." A swirl of conflicting emotions battled within him. At last, he relented. "All right, but please let me know as soon as you get to the hospital. I have a phone. Sort of. I'll figure something out." The medic nodded, handing him a small card with the hospital's main number. "You can call us there." Matthew stepped back, watching the rescue truck maneuver out of the lot, treads crushing snow beneath it. In the fading light, he caught a final glimpse of Victoria's face through the frosty window. She raised a trembling hand, a silent farewell for now. Then she was gone, swallowed by the winter dusk. The second rescue vehicle arrived about an hour later, a snowcat with room for a passenger. Exhausted and fighting off chills, Matthew wasted no time climbing aboard. He directed the driver to his home address first, desperate to check on Emma. The operator, a friendly man named Rodriguez, agreed, citing that more storms might be coming, and it was best to gather family. They navigated slowly through side roads still cluttered with drifts. Streetlights flickered, many damaged by the storm. The ride was jarring, each bump reminding Matthew of his own battered state. By the time they reached his small house, night had fully fallen. The porch light was on a small miracle suggesting electricity had been restored at least here. Matthew stumbled out of the snowcat, nearly sprinting up the steps. He fumbled with his keys, hands shaking from cold and nerves, then burst through the door. Dad, Emma's voice echoed from the living room. She sprang to her feet, a swirl of relief and alarm crossing her face. In seconds, she was in his arms, hugging him with all the force a 12-year-old could muster. "Where were you? I was so scared." He held her tight, voice trembling. "I'm sorry, baby. I was trapped at the garage, helping someone who crashed in the storm." She pulled back, eyes scanning his face, noticing the exhaustion etched into every line. "You're okay. You look, I'm okay now," he assured her, though tears stung the corners of his eyes. He forced a smile. "Everything else, we'll handle later. Let me introduce Rodriguez from the rescue team. They're helping us get back on our feet." Emma wiped her cheeks, composing herself. The man at the door gave a polite nod. "We can take you both to the community shelter if you'd prefer," he offered. "It's heated. Got meals. The roads might freeze over again tonight." Matthew glanced around their modest home. The heat was on, which was a relief, though he worried about the empty fridge and potential blackouts. Still, being together in their own place felt like a balm after the ordeal. "Thanks, but I think we'll stay here. I can handle the rest." Rodriguez nodded, handing Matthew a slip of paper with contact information. "If you change your mind or need anything, give us a call. We're patrolling all night." After the snowcat left, father and daughter locked the door. Emma insisted on making them both a simple dinner can chili warmed in the microwave. Though meager, it tasted like a feast to Matthew. Over the meal, he told her a softened version of events, how a woman named Victoria crashed, how he tried to help, and how rescue finally came. "Is she going to be okay?" Emma asked, her voice laced with concern for the stranger. "I believe so. They took her to Oakvale Hospital," Matthew replied, tapping the card in his pocket. "In the morning, I'll call and check." Silence fell as they finished their chili. The weight of the last few days pressed down on Matthew, but a sense of relief mingled with it, knowing Emma was safe and Victoria was in capable hands. Tomorrow, he'd piece together the next steps, hopefully talk to Victoria again, and maybe, just maybe, explore the surprising partnership she'd hinted at. Morning sunlight poured through the thin curtains in Emma's small but tidy living room, revealing a space cluttered with half-finished Lego structures and a scattering of mismatched furniture. Matthew awoke on the couch, stiff but oddly at peace, with Emma curled in a sleeping bag on the rug. She'd insisted on staying close to him, too worried to return to her own room that night. He gently nudged her awake. "Hey, kiddo, I need to make a phone call." She stirred, blinking up at him with bleary eyes. Yeah, okay. They both got dressed quickly, layering sweaters against the lingering chill in the house. The electricity worked, but the heating still sputtered occasionally. Grateful that the landline seemed operational now, Matthew dialed the hospital number the medic had given him. After a few transfers, he reached a nurse who confirmed a Victoria Hawthorne had been admitted overnight, treated for a fractured collarbone and multiple contusions, but was stable and resting. A wave of relief washed through him. Can I speak to her? He asked, gripping the phone tightly. The nurse hesitated. She's in a post-operative ward, lightly sedated. I can transfer you to her room, but if she's asleep, she might not pick up. That's fine, Matthew said. The line rang, a dull beep in his ear, until a soft click indicated someone had answered. A groggy female voice whispered, "Hello." His heart jolted. "Victoria, it's Matthew." A silence. Then, "Matthew. God, am I dreaming?" He smiled, relief warming his chest. "No dream. I'm home with Emma. Are you okay?" She let out a faint laugh that turned into a cough. "They did surgery on my collarbone. I'm in a sling. Hurts like hell. But they say I'll heal. The rest of me is banged up, but it could have been worse." Matthew swallowed the surge of emotion. "I'm so glad. Sorry I didn't come with you." "No, you did the right thing. You have your daughter." I, her voice trailed off, as if she was battling a swirl of feelings. "Anyway, the doctors want me here for a few days, but I'll be in Denver eventually. That meeting I was so worried about got postponed. Turns out the storm stranded half the participants." A part of him marveled at the irony her frantic rush was rendered moot by Mother Nature. "Well, that's something. Matthew," she began, her tone shifting. "When this all settles, I want to follow through with what we discussed. Helping your garage, building something. I'm serious." He felt his pulse quicken. "Are you sure I wasn't sure if that was just talk in a moment of crisis?" "It wasn't," she said firmly. "Give me a few days to recover, and I'll have my people reach out. We can talk more. Maybe set up a formal plan." He hesitated, glancing at Emma in the kitchen doorway, her curious eyes on him. "I'd like that," he said softly. "Thank you." They lingered on the line, neither wanting to hang up. Finally, a nurse bustled in, and Matthew heard Victoria's muffled apology before she said goodbye. The call ended, leaving him staring at the receiver with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Emma bounded over. "Dad, what happened?" He draped an arm around her shoulders. "She's gonna be fine, kiddo. And things might be changing for us soon." Over the next few days, life resumed a semblance of normalcy. School reopened, so Emma spent her mornings catching up on missed lessons. Matthew hauled borrowed space heaters from a neighbor to the garage, intending to get his business operational again. The phone lines held steady. Though customers were few, everyone in town was dealing with storm damage or digging out their cars. During a lull, he revisited the battered generator in the garage, hoping to coax it back to life. Having access to a stable power source would be crucial if he wanted to rebuild his operation. While he tinkered with wires and spark plugs, a red pickup rumbled into the lot. Out stepped Dale Parker, the rancher who had saved Matthew from near hypothermia. Dale waved, his breath forming clouds in the crisp air. "Heard you were back," he said. "Thought I'd see how you're holding up." Matthew wiped grease from his hands. "Better. Thanks to you. I still owe you big." Dale shrugged. "Neighbors help neighbors. That's all. Any word on the Lady Victoria?" Matthew supplied. "She's recovering in the hospital. We've spoken a few times. She's grateful to all of us." At that, Dale extended a thermos. "Brought you fresh coffee. Figured you might need it." Matthew smiled. "Man, you have a sixth sense for when coffee is needed." They sipped in companionable silence, steam curling in the cold. Eventually, Dale asked, "What's your plan now?" Matthew glanced around the grimy garage. The chipped paint, outdated equipment. Honestly, not sure. Victoria hinted at some form of partnership or help for this place, but I don't want to rely on a miracle. I've been behind on payments, and the bank's threatened foreclosure. A thoughtful look crossed Dale's face. You've got skill, and you're good people. If she's serious, it might be the break you've been praying for. Matthew nodded, a knot of cautious hope in his chest. Yeah, if she's serious. That afternoon, after Dale left, the phone rang this time. A slick-voiced representative from Sinclair Motors introduced herself as Meredith Slater, Victoria Hawthorne's executive assistant. She got right to the point. Ms. Hawthorne wants to set a meeting in Denver as soon as she's released. We'd like you to come. She mentioned you might have some valuable input on a new line of vehicles we're developing. Matthew held the receiver, swallowing his nerves. I mean, sure, I'd like to help, but I can't just leave my daughter behind. Bring her along if you need to, Meredith replied smoothly. We can arrange accommodations. Ms. Hawthorne insists. The conversation felt surreal. The corporate world rarely bent over backward for a small-town mechanic. But here was an assistant offering to coordinate travel, lodging, and possibly more. By the time he hung up, a swirl of excitement and fear roiled inside him. Could this truly be a lifeline? Or was he stepping into a realm where he'd be overwhelmed and out of place in the fading winter sunlight streaming through the garage windows? He rested his hand on the battered generator, the symbol of his current struggles. All right, he murmured to himself. Let's see where this leads. The day finally arrived when Matthew and Emma found themselves en route to Denver. It wasn't a fancy private jet or a limousine. Rather, Sinclair Motors had arranged a basic sedan to pick them up from Maplewood and drive them to a hotel near the corporation's downtown headquarters. Emma, wide-eyed and full of questions, kept poking at the car's plush seats, marveling at how this all felt like a movie. Matthew's heart hammered with each mile they traveled from their quiet town into the looming skyscrapers of the city. Even the hustle of downtown traffic felt foreign and intimidating. He reminded himself to breathe. This was just a meeting. If it went nowhere, at least he tried. The hotel was a sleek high-rise with mirrored windows that seemed to scrape the sky. A polite bellhop took their small suitcases, leading them through a gleaming lobby of marble floors and potted palms. Emma gaped at the chandelier overhead, nearly stumbling when it reflected rainbows onto the floor. Matthew offered a reassuring pat on her shoulder, though inside he felt just as awestruck. At check-in, an attendant smiled. Welcome. Mr. Cole, we have you booked in a suite on the 17th floor, courtesy of Sinclair Motors. She handed over key cards. Your meeting with Ms. Hawthorne is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Should you require anything, don't hesitate to call the front desk. A suite. Matthew suppressed a cringe. It sounded so lavish, especially given the near bankruptcy of his garage. But Emma's excitement was contagious, and he found himself smiling as they rode the elevator up. The suite itself was an exercise in modern luxury, a sitting area with floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchenette stocked with bottled juices, and a bedroom with pristine white linens. Emma beamed, darting around to peek at every corner. Later, they ventured downstairs to grab a quick dinner at the hotel cafe. Emma chattered about the city lights she wanted to see, the possibility of ice skating at a nearby rink, and her hope that the meeting would make their lives a little less scary. Matthew listened, nodding. He felt an odd weight in his chest, pride in his daughter's resilience, and a flicker of guilt that he couldn't provide such experiences for her sooner. Back in the room, as Emma showered, Matthew stepped onto the balcony, taking in the twinkling skyline. The city hummed with life cars, neon signs, distant sirens, and the constant glow of windows stacked hundreds of feet high. He exhaled, remembering the lonely nights in his dark garage just a week ago. The difference felt staggering. He wondered about Victoria. Was she resting at the hospital, or had she been discharged already? The plan, according to her assistant, was for her to attend the meeting in person if her condition allowed. He pictured her with a sling, bruises fading, but that fierce determination intact. A phone buzz from inside startled him. Emma poked her head out of the bathroom, hair damp. "Dad, your phone!" Matthew rushed in, flipping it open. Another unknown number. He answered, half expecting a telemarketer. Instead, Victoria's voice, warm and somehow stronger than he remembered Matthew. "You made it to Denver," he smiled at Emma, giving a thumbs up. "We did. Just got settled. How are you feeling?" "Better," she replied. "I'm still in a sling, but I'm ready to make this official. Tomorrow. 9A Sinclair Tower. Let's start building something new. Shall we?" Morning dawned crisp and clear, an orange hue warming the Denver skyline. In the hotel suite, Matthew dressed in his best collared shirt, one he'd worn for Emma's school events. It was old, but pressed neatly, and he prayed it wouldn't look too out of place in a boardroom full of suits. Emma wore a modest skirt and sweater, looking both excited and nervous. They arrived at Sinclair Tower a half hour early, stepping into a vaulted lobby with polished granite floors and a sweeping glass atrium. Tall banners displayed concept art for electric trucks and hybrid commercial fleets, visions of the automotive future. Matt's stomach twisted in awe and intimidation. He held Emma's hand as they approached a reception desk labeled Corporate Offices. A polished young woman smiled. "Mr. Cole, Ms. Slater will be right with you. Your daughter can wait in our lounge if you'd like." Emma glanced around, wide-eyed. "Dad," he squeezed her hand. "It's okay. I'll find you after the meeting." "Sweetie." Moments later, Meredith Slater appeared, a poised figure in a tailored suit, her hair pinned in a tight bun. She greeted Matthew with a businesslike handshake, then knelt slightly to greet Emma. "We have snacks and a TV in the lounge, if that's okay," she said with a gentle smile. Emma nodded shyly, following another attendant away. As soon as Emma was gone, Meredith turned to Matthew. "Ms. Hawthorne will meet us on the 30th floor. She's still in a sling, but insisted on being present." There was a hint of admiration in her voice. "Let's go up." They rode a sleek elevator, the doors reflecting Matthew's nervous face back at him. Meredith tapped her foot, checking her phone every few seconds. When they arrived, the doors opened onto a hushed corridor lined with tinted glass walls. At the far end, a large conference room glowed with overhead LED lighting. Inside, a handful of board members sat around a polished ebony table. In the center was Victoria Hawthorne, her right arm in a sling over a tailored jacket. Despite the obvious strain on her face from her injuries, she exuded the calm authority of someone who belonged in that seat. A small flutter tugged at Matthew's chest relief at seeing her well, pride that she was forging ahead. She offered a slow smile as he entered. "Matthew, good to see you outside a freezing garage." He tried to quell his nerves, stepping forward. "Likewise. How are you feeling?" She gave a small shrug, then winced. "Better than before, ready to do business." Before he could reply, one of the board members cleared his throat. A well-groomed man in his 50s, with a salt and pepper mustache and a crisp navy suit, spoke. "Shall we begin?" He glanced at Matthew without warmth. "We have limited time." Victoria waved a hand dismissively. "This is Mr. Matthew Cole, the mechanic I told you about. His input is crucial to the local production strategy we're discussing." A skeptical murmur rippled around the table. Another board member, an older woman with stern glasses, drummed her fingernails. "We've read the summary, Ms. Hawthorne, but bringing in an outsider, no offense. Mr. Cole raises questions of confidentiality and expertise." Matthew's heart pounded. He wasn't naive about corporate politics. This crowd looked at him like he was an odd piece of machinery they weren't sure belonged. But a determined glint in Victoria's eye told him she had no intention of backing down. She let the silence linger, then spoke. "I owe this man my life. And Sinclair Motors may well owe him its next big breakthrough if we're wise enough to listen." With that bold declaration, Victoria invited Matthew to sit beside her at the conference table. The board members exchanged wary glances. but no one voiced outright objections. Meredith Slater hovered at the edge of the room, tapping notes into a tablet. A projector screen lit up, showcasing designs for Project Orion, a new electric truck aimed at both commercial fleets and rural communities, an ambitious plan that merged cutting-edge technology with practical ruggedness. Victoria clicked through slides one-handed, wincing occasionally as she maneuvered the remote. She explained how Project Orion was meant to expand Sinclair Motors' reach into sustainable transport, citing potential government contracts and eco-focused partnerships. When she finished, the mustached man Harold Whitmore, introduced earlier as the CFO, fixed his gaze on Matthew. So, Mr. Cole, in your opinion, what makes this design feasible for real mechanics in the field? Matthew cleared his throat, trying to corral his nerves. He glanced at the slides, sleek prototypes with streamlined battery packs, integrated sensors, advanced control units. On paper, it looked impressive, but he spotted immediate red flags from a mechanic's perspective. The systems are great in theory, he began, but there's a question about parts availability and service. If this truck breaks down in a rural area where the nearest dealership might be 100 miles away, what then? Electric drivetrains can be complicated. Local mechanics might not have the specialized tools or training. A flicker of interest lit Victoria's eyes. That was likely the insight she wanted from him. Another board member, a bald man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. That's why we plan to offer extended warranties and service contracts. Matthew shook his head. I get that, but warranties don't help if you're stranded in the middle of nowhere on a Sunday. If you want real adoption, you need modular components, easy-to-swap parts, and simplified diagnostics. Something an experienced mechanic could handle without a fancy dealership computer. A chorus of murmurs rippled through the board. Some frowned, others scribbled notes. Harold pressed on. But that might increase production costs. More modular parts mean less proprietary design, Victoria cut in. Yet it could also broaden our market share. Farmers, small business owners, and folks in remote towns will be more likely to invest if they can trust that a breakdown won't cripple them for days. Matthew felt the tension in the room. He sensed some board members disliked him, a non-engineer, non-corporate type criticizing their pet project. But he also saw others nodding thoughtfully. He took a breath, deciding to push further. I know it might not be standard procedure, but partnering with local garages or even offering training modules could be a huge selling point. Imagine a network of certified small-town mechanics who can handle basic issues. With streamlined parts, ordering. Victoria grinned, glancing at him in approval. Then she looked around at the table. Which is why I've been advocating for a pilot program, one where we invest in community garages, upgrade their skills and tools, in return for them becoming official service points for Sinclair's new line. Her eyes flicked to Matthew. Mr. Cole's garage would be our prototype, if he's willing. A current of disbelief surged around the table. One of the stern women blurted, That's unprecedented. Are we seriously handing over brand representation to a single mechanic in a small town? It's more than just me, Matthew managed, heart thudding. It's a model that can be replicated elsewhere. If it works in my town, it might work in dozens of others. Victoria folded her good arm across her chest. Exactly. And if we want to corner this market, we need grassroots credibility. We need the trust of real folks who use these trucks every day. Silence weighed heavy in the room. Matthew half expected someone to laugh or dismiss the idea outright. Instead, a careful debate began. Harold Whitmore, the CFO, flipped through some documents, frowning. We'd need cost analyses, territory mapping, partnership agreements. This is no small undertaking. Victoria nodded. We'll gather all that data, but I want the board's conceptual buy-in first. We can't treat this like a typical top-down rollout. We want a revolution in how we approach service and community outreach. One board member, the stern woman with glasses, finally spoke. There's risk. If the pilot fails, we lose money, tarnish our brand, and potentially hamper Project Orion's launch. Victoria's voice was steady, though Matthew sensed tension behind her calm facade. I'm aware of the risks, but the potential upside is enormous, a loyal customer base that sees us not as an elite brand, but a partner in their livelihood. Harold leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. All right, Ms. Hawthorne, you have a single vote that can push this forward, but the board must approve as well. We'll want a formal proposal on the pilot program, costs, timelines, potential expansions. Mr. Cole's garage can be case study number one. Case study number one, Matthew repeated internally, amazed at how quickly his life was morphing. He felt both elated and terrified. Victoria tapped a finger on the table. Fine. I'll have my team draft the specifics. In the meantime, Mr. Cole can help outline the practical requirements, and if we're greenlit, we start with a modest budget for retooling his shop. The board members exchanged glances. A few nodded. Harold sighed. Let's put it to a preliminary vote, acknowledging we need details later. They did so, with raised hands, some enthusiastic, some begrudging. To Matthew's shock, a majority agreed to proceed with the pilot concept. Harold noted the outcome, his voice grudgingly respectful. Motion passes, pending final review. Victoria exhaled, relief evident. Thank you, everyone. Let's break for now. We'll reconvene next week with more data. As the board members gathered their papers and filed out, some gave Matthew a polite nod. Others avoided eye contact. Soon, the room emptied, leaving only Victoria, Meredith Slater, and him. Victoria turned to Matthew, her face a mix of exhaustion and triumph. We did it. Step one. Anyway, he ran a hand through his hair, adrenaline still coursing. I can't believe it. She flashed a grin. Believe it. I meant what I said. This is a partnership, but it won't be easy. There'll be pushback, deadlines, all kinds of corporate headaches. She gestured to the sling. And I'm not exactly at full strength yet. Matthew swallowed. I'm ready to work, but I'm no businessman. I fix cars. That's exactly what we need, Victoria replied. Someone who knows the reality on the ground, not just spreadsheets. She paused, sincerity lining her features. Matthew, you saved my life. Now let's save your garage. He felt a lump in his throat, remembering the storm, the battered SUV, the nights huddled in the cold. It all led here. With a faint tremor in his voice, he simply said, let's do it. A week later, the whirlwind truly began. Legal documents, NDAs, cost estimates, training modules. Matthew's phone rang nonstop with calls from Sinclair's project leads. Meredith Slater emailed him daily, clarifying everything from square footage of his shop to local demographic data. He felt like he'd stepped onto a carnival ride that spun faster than he could control. Emma watched with wide-eyed fascination, sometimes overhearing corporate jargon like ROI, asset utilization, and brand synergy. She'd catch her dad rubbing his temples and gently ask, "You okay?" Dad, to which he'd smile wryly and say, "Learning a new language here." Sweetheart. Through it all, Victoria stayed in touch. Though she was often tied up with board meetings or doctor's appointments for her shoulder, she'd call late in the evening, voice tired yet resolute, checking on progress and occasionally sharing a personal anecdote that made Matthew see the woman beneath the CEO exterior. He learned she'd grown up in a working-class family herself, that she'd fought tooth and nail to climb the corporate ladder, and that losing her father at a young age gave her a fierce sense of independence. On a crisp Monday morning, a Sinclair Motors van pulled up to Cole's Auto Service. A team of engineers and architects hopped out, led by a wiry man named Terry Lamb, who introduced himself as the project coordinator. "We're here to do a structural assessment," he explained, adjusting his glasses. "See what we're working with, how to best retrofit for electric diagnostics and advanced tooling." Matthew let them explore, his anxiety level spiking as they took measurements, snapped photos, and scribbled notes. The place looked so run-down, chipped concrete floor, battered lifts, a generator that still lay in pieces in the side room. He worried they'd consider it a lost cause, But Terry seemed surprisingly upbeat. We can reinforce the floor, bring in new lifts, install charging infrastructure. Sure, it'll cost, but that's what the pilot program budget is for, he said in grinning. Honestly, I've seen worse. At least you don't have mold in the walls. Relief coursed through Matthew. He'd half expected them to declare the building condemned. Instead, they seemed confident about turning it into a state-of-the-art service bay. The biggest challenge came from local zoning laws. Matthew discovered he needed special permits for large-scale remodeling and installing commercial EV chargers. But Sinclair's legal team stepped in, filing applications and smoothing bureaucratic wrinkles. Step by step, the pilot was becoming a tangible reality. One evening, as Emma did homework in the corner of the shop office, Matthew stared at the blueprint Terry's team had drafted. It showed a reorganized layout, 3 modern lifts, a partition for EV battery diagnostics, a sleek front reception area. It was almost unrecognizable compared to his father's old, cluttered workspace. A pang of nostalgia flickered. He missed the simpler days, but realized he needed to evolve or lose everything. He glanced at Emma, who was humming quietly. "This is gonna change our lives, you know," he said softly. She looked up, eyes bright. "Maybe that's not so bad." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You might be right, kiddo." Then he rubbed the back of his neck, letting out a breath. "Hope your grandpa would be proud." She rose, walked over, and gave him a quick hug. "I bet he would, Dad. We're Coles. After all, we fix what's broken." Right amid the frantic progress, corporate deadlines, and construction planning, word began spreading around town that Matthew Cole was partnering with Sinclair Motors. Neighbors and longtime customers dropped by, curious or skeptical, wanting to hear the real story. Some teased him good-naturedly, "Big shot now," while others voiced concern about losing the small-town authenticity of the garage. Matthew tried to reassure them. "I'm still me, still your neighbor. I'll just have better tools to fix your cars." Deep down, he wrestled with balancing tradition and innovation. The old red sign reading Cole's Auto Service Est. 1972 still hung over the entrance, its paint chipped but full of sentimental weight. He wasn't sure if it would survive the remodel, and that stung more than he expected. Meanwhile, the local paper ran a front-page story, "Storm Rescue Leads to Unlikely Partnership. Small-town mechanic and big CEO join forces." Matthew cringed at his photo taken hastily in the garage, smudges of grease on his cheek. He guessed the story had come from someone at City Hall hearing about the permits. It wasn't just local interest. A regional news station reached out for an interview. When the day came, a camera crew arrived, capturing footage of the worn-out garage about to get a $1 million facelift. The reporter, bright-eyed and microphone in hand, asked questions about the storm rescue, about Victoria Hawthorne, about the future of automotive service in rural areas. Matthew felt awkward under the lens. He stumbled through explanations, giving credit to Victoria for her vision, to the rescue teams for saving them both, to the community that had always supported him. The segment aired 2 nights later, shining a spotlight on their heartwarming story. Matthew watched from his living room couch, Emma by his side. Her laughter was infectious whenever she spotted him on the screen. But not everyone was thrilled. One afternoon, while dropping Emma off at school, he overheard grumbles from a local competitor, Doug's Auto Repair, suggesting Matthew had sold out. A flicker of anger rose in Matthew, but he forced a polite nod. In his heart, he knew he wasn't abandoning his roots. He was just trying to survive and hopefully thrive. On top of that, tension simmered within Sinclair Motors itself. Victoria confided in him over the phone that certain board members and shareholders were raising eyebrows at the pilot's costs. They wanted quicker ROI, less risk. She was fighting on multiple fronts: corporate politics, her own healing, the logistical complexity of Project Orion. Yet through the turbulence, a deeper bond formed between them. Late-night calls were peppered with discussions about torque specs in distribution networks, but also jokes about how she never thought she'd find herself enthralled by talk of spark plugs and battery chemistry. Matthew, for his part, opened up about raising Emma, about missing his wife, about how strange it felt to trust a big company after being burned by debt and bureaucracy before. Victoria's voice always held empathy. "We'll make it work," she'd say. "We got this far." Right, and each time, Matthew believed her a bit more. Months passed in a blur of demolition and construction at Cole's Auto Service. Walls were knocked down, new lifts installed, the floor reinforced. Outside, a towering sign was erected: Cole's Auto Sinclair Community Partner. It felt surreal to see his family name entwined with a corporate logo. Yet the synergy was exactly what Project Orion needed: proof that modern technology could coexist with grassroots service. The day before the grand reopening, a private car pulled up, and out stepped Victoria Hawthorne, finally out of her sling but still sporting a cautious stiffness in her posture. She wore a tailored blazer, more business than casual, but her eyes shone with personal investment in this moment. When Matthew saw her, he broke into a wide grin, meeting her halfway across the gravel lot. "You came in person," he said, half astonished. She arched a brow. "Wouldn't miss it. Besides, how else could I see the place that nearly killed me in a snowstorm?" He chuckled, though the memory still felt fresh. "Well, we've done some remodeling since then." Emma bounded out from behind a stack of crates, waving excitedly. Miss Hawthorne. Victoria greeted her warmly, crouching to speak at eye level. "Hi, Emma. Looks like your dad's turned this place into something pretty cool." "Huh," Emma nodded. "Way cooler than before." Matthew led them inside. The new garage interior glistened with fresh paint and advanced diagnostic stations. A row of tablets replaced old charts, and the EV charger bays stood ready for the Orion trucks, soon to roll off the assembly line. The old sign from 1972 was now mounted on a wall near the entrance, a tribute to the legacy and a reminder of where it all started. Victoria's expression turned serious. She laid a hand on Matthew's shoulder. This is exactly what I envisioned. A real, tangible step forward." He swallowed the lump in his throat, nodding. "Couldn't have done it without you." Later, a modest ribbon-cutting ceremony took place. Board members from Sinclair arrived in press suits. Local officials showed up with big scissors, and curious townsfolk gathered. Cameras flashed. A handful of reporters hovered. Victoria and Matthew stood side by side, each gripping a piece of ribbon. With one coordinated snip, the crowd applauded. A cheer went up. "Go, Cole's Sinclair for the win." The swirl of excitement nearly overwhelmed Matthew. He caught Victoria's eye, and she smiled, a shared recognition that they'd crossed a finish line few had believed in. In the days that followed, the pilot program gained traction. Tech magazines wrote glowing pieces about the mechanic and the CEO, praising the combination of corporate vision and small-town know-how. More importantly, customers with brand new Orion trucks started rolling in, trusting that Coles could handle any issue. Word spread across rural communities that this wasn't just fancy talk, it worked. One late evening, after the shop closed, Matthew and Victoria sat on the tailgate of a newly delivered Orion truck, sipping coffee in the warm glow of overhead lights. Emma was at home with a friend, leaving them a rare quiet moment. Victoria gazed at the building, the sign, the horizon. "You realize," she murmured, "this is just the start. We'll expand to other towns, maybe even nationwide." Matthew smiled, a slow, content exhale escaping him. "I'm good with that," he said. Then he turned, letting his hand rest gently on hers. "Long as we never forget why we did it. People first." "Right." She squeezed his fingers, warmth flickering in her eyes. "People first," she echoed. "Always." In that simple moment, they both understood how far they'd come from the snowbound night that changed their lives and how far they still could go, forging a future where big ideas and honest work existed side by side, bound by a single, life-saving wrench that had opened every door. In the end, it wasn't about cars or companies, wealth or wrenches. It was about the quiet courage it takes to let go, to loosen the grip on the past so tightly held, to reach across the space between worlds and choose connection over comfort. It was about recognizing that the things we repair, the lives we rebuild, are not always made of metal and wires, but of moments, trust, and simple acts of kindness. The journey cost them both dearly. Pride surrendered, assumptions shattered, fears faced head-on. They lost the certainty of who they were, only to find something far more precious, a deeper understanding of who they could become together. Each choice they made rippled outward, touching lives they'd never anticipated, creating legacies far stronger than steel. And now, as the engines cool and the lights fade, as silence settles once more over roads they've traveled, one truth remains clear. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight, echoing long after the moment has passed. When life offers you a chance encounter, a stranger in need, or an unexpected detour, will you drive past? Or will you stop, reach out your hand, and risk the journey ahead?